Okay, this lesson for the Cornet Project class, I'd like to speak not as an alarmist, but I would like to suggest that when it comes to eschatology, it would be best or reflect the urgency of the scripture is to notice we should be thinking exponentially in relationship to our eschatology. And before we begin, I'd just like to introduce this book, The Mind Changers. I've known about it, and it says the art of Christian persuasion, but it was only thinking about time, it occurred to me to look and see how old it is. 1976. And since then, and think about how popular that was and well established then, that metanoia, repent, or metanoia, metanoia, the noun change of mind, and then the art of Christian persuasion. So that's been well established, and I found it fascinating that this many years later, the dispute over persuasion, being persuaded by the gospel, is still very much alive. Now, back to this, I built the chart, have the geological and chronological, which is not the same as the dual causal relationship. This is God's is a dual. I mean, God is a causal being, and He created man as a causal being, and we know causal agency in our language. And then we have the geographical, political. But notice this dual causality is in ratio, and the geological and chronological ages in the Bible, that is also in ratio. And I would now be focusing here about the geographical and political realities and landscape of our world is also in ratio. So number one, just quickly, and I'll put a link to a video about the case for a recent Earth creation, but we're looking at chronological years. So when we took the 12,500, which resulted from 6,250 at 12 hours per day, and then we took 6,250 at 12 hours per night, that gave us the 12,500. And remember, we had one day as 1,000 years, and then we had 1,000 years as one day. So that ratio, so when we took this and multiplied it by days, 360 days in the calendar year, that gave us the 4.5 million days, which then when we multiplied it by 1,000 years, it equaled 4.5 billion years. And that was the amount of decay. So amount of decay. So that would be the geological age. And then we had chronological. So far, the Bible is very accurate. And then the geophenomenal factors that we learned that, for example, when a volcano explodes or erupts, they could take Mount St. Helens, for example, 1986, 10 years later, 1996, knowing chronologically that magma was created 10 years earlier. They were getting readings that were thousands of times more. Well, when you bring in chemical and physical factors, that accounts for it. Well, then we notice if we took the 4.5 and went this direction times 1,000 days, we know it's 1,000 days, approximately 2.78 years at 360 days, and that equaled the 12.5 billion years. And that's also the amount of decay. So that's geological decay and the amount accrued. And you can notice that 2.78 also is very close to that number E, which is 2.718281828. And then, of course, to finish it off, it's 45, 90, 45. Anyway, so with that, we noticed that this is this has been observed in nature. Genesis 1:1 tabulates to the number pi, and John 1:1 tabulates to the number e. So we can see we're dying 10 times faster. During the antediluvian age, lifespans were within 1,000 years. Methuselah living 969, the oldest. And then today we notice in Psalm 90 where God removed 90% of lifespan was removed from 100% humanity of mankind. Now, one theologian said we should be thankful because that was to reduce the violence that led to the flood in the first place. So think about evil today and the diabolical schemes that are taking place. If we had, let's say, a Charles Manson that lived to be up to 1,000 years, what type of evil he would have done. But thinking in eschatological terms and factors that are causing us to recognize the exponential capacity for us to produce evil on an exponential rate, that's where we'll get to in this number 3. But dual causality, for example, we remember Jezebel. Jesus said in Revelation, and I, Adoka, we're doing our homework, and I gave Alte to her, chronon. And notice we've got time. We've already talked about chronological years, geological years. We notice the Bible is accurate when it refers to both of those. So the only way that's possible that people thousands of years ago had knowledge of what only we could ascertain through technology is because it is inspired. Gave to her a time span in order that Hina clause, in order that, remember, our only question here is this true? Well, this is the way, the truth, and the life speaking. Jesus saying, I gave to her a time span in order that, and I'll come over here, in order that she might change her mind, throwback to our 1976 book, The Mind Changers, The Art of Christian Persuasion, change her mind. Out from taste the porneos, that'd be a good word, harlotry. Altes, her particular harlotry. Now remember that involved false teaching. Her particular harlotry. Kai, it says, and we're back to this word here. Let's just go ahead. Mete. Now you notice this is the augment. This is aorist active subjunctive, and this is just simple aorist. So we have the augment. Mete no a sin. There we go. And she did not. Wait a minute. Got to put the not there. And she did not change her mind. Now put this here to show that we know this dual causality, the causal God as he interacts, which living is demonstrated by interaction and very well defined by it, that God created a living environment to interact with the living creatures, and he's the living God. So he's causal, she's causal, and he told the truth that he, in time and space, gave her time, and only he can do that, gave her time with a real, true, and genuine purpose. You remember he said that the miracles he performed at Capernaum, for example, had they been demonstrated at Sodom, that city, Sodom, would still be here today. So Sodom was destroyed while the people were still persuadable, and Capernaum had the undeserved favor of seeing the miracles performed in their presence, and they were beyond persuasion, and all that's God's discretion. So now let's go to what we're speaking of now, the geographical and political, and I'd like to make a couple of notes here on number 3. So this is number 3. This is obviously number 1. We talked about it. This is number 2. And before I leave that, remember that we are living less time chronologically, but we're all decaying the same amount. That is, Noah was 500 approximately when he began to build the ark, but he wasn't from 75 years on a walker and stumbling along for a few centuries more, and then at 500 trying to build an ark. No, at 500 he would be the health of what we call a 50-year-old. So we're decaying faster within the chronological time frames in which our lives are experiencing that rate of decay. So now that we're at number 3, our world, as we seemingly wake up every day, and it seems like it's changed overnight, now we're talking about Hamas and Israel and an unprecedented assault, and the dynamics of our world and the geopolitical landscape has changed drastically. Well, first of all, the volume of knowledge now doubles every 12 hours. Isn't that something? And notice, well, let's just say A, and then B, it once doubled every 25 years as of 1945. So that's fascinating, that knowledge is now doubling. Well, also the ability to process that knowledge, I'll just say note. Well, here's a number 2 note. Number 2 note, we have computers, of course, and now we have A, networks, and then B, we have internetworks. And then, of course, we have that AI technology, which has not been yet fully realized in what it can do. But there were people startled by when did these people make these plans, and when did they develop these strategies to deploy such a onslaught against Israel, for example. Well, that's the point is that if knowledge is doubling every 12 hours when it was once taken 25 years, then we can now notice that eschatologically speaking, how will our world ever get to the point where, for example, you remember 2028 was 80 years. In Psalm 90, it says you live 70 years and 80 with strength. And then from 1948 to here was 80 years. And then, of course, we noticed that Isaac Newton said 2060 was his conjecture of the termination of the world. Of course, that had 32 years interval, and then Usher said 1996, and that's 32 years. And all that is the pattern. But we noticed that we were centering here as we were noticing the scholars' work out here showing us. But now when you start noticing how things are changing exponentially, and that we know that in a day, well, now in 12 hours, knowledge doubles, and yet we now have computer processors and whatever it's all called that can process data, billions of bits of data in just moments, and yet we only have 8 billion people on the planet. So I was asking a scientist who was speaking in one of our classes, and he was reporting about how powerful the computers are and how they can process all this data. I said, what's all the data about? And the conclusion was not because there's that much data to be processed, but it's about rate and how fast we want to do it. So when you speak of, for example, imminent return, for example, if you were to think of that, number 3, whatever here. Here's just be one note, A, B, 2, A, B, C. Number 3, if we think of that as a rate of development, what's the rate of development that has shown us geographical and political implications? What's now the rate of development of the things we read in the Bible that would come to pass prior to the return of Christ, or as some say, prior to the rapture? Well, let's go here and look for just a moment. We're all in the same location now. As I've said, I was trained and, well, taught as, and I don't mean they meant to deceive, but they would teach us the urgency to believe Jesus Christ for everlasting life, because we might die and enter eternity as people who are lost. And then when we believed Jesus for everlasting life, we were taught always be ready for any moment Jesus might come and take us away. And that was, again, a sense of urgency. It had nothing to do with a future tribulation, or it wasn't a prophecy class where you were trying to tell young people the prophetic implications and all that would take place in the political landscape, because that's why I said I was asking friends for years, why are you talking about tribulation? I was talking about the rapture. Why are you talking about tribulation somewhere out there? Because I told them I wasn't supposed to ever be here when George Bush stood up and said we're in a new world order in 1991. I wasn't supposed to be here in 2001 when we had the unprecedented assault on the homeland. I wasn't supposed to be here in 2000, Y2K, and the whole world was going to shut down. Wasn't supposed to be here during a global pandemic, unprecedented global war on terrorism. We have all these things, but now those things, as horrible as they are, now move to a thinking process of exponential now that we have a global scale, because all these networks now are global. Global, all this is global, and the rate of development now. So we're sitting here with a middle, 3.5 years, and then 3.5 years. And of course, there are those that say it's only the second half wanting. There are those who notice that actual outbreak of tribulation won't occur until here, when the covenant's broken by the Antichrist. And yet there are those who have days prior to this, just at the threshold. There are those who have days beyond this. And I really look forward to, like some say, 30 days. Just, I don't have all the specifics, but days are, and I recently saw someone said there was a 30-day interval here, perhaps. Now, I like the idea that it's pre, mid, and post, because that will go with our 3 when we evaluate that very critically, and then become very exact when we put the numbers to it and see what we can learn. Because I just recently learned that there's now software about chronology and calendars, where Sir Robert Anderson's calculation of 173,800 days should actually be 173,803 days, something like that. So whatever that precision is, it's fine-tuning, obviously, with the resources. But if we're all going to be here somewhere, we're all here, and we're all our conversation escalates as we get toward this period here, because there are people that just have no interest in it. They just say they won't be here. Others have interest in it but can't find an audience. That's why I say we really need to start thinking exponentially. But what kind of world will we be in as we continue to approach the time where those who teach pre-trib find the need to be taken out of here to be now a reality? And then those who say, well, there's no need to leave until we get to the middle, that's when all hell breaks loose. Well, again, what will the world look like? What will it take? Well, knowing now that we can have changes, geopolitical landscape can change. We can have one day to a year. We can have a year's worth of history transpire in a day because of these instantaneous, simultaneous, we can have multi-directional, simultaneous convergence. We can see leagues of nations. We can see cyber communications. We can see things processed at rates of speed. So to say, well, I'm bored with prophecy, this no longer possible. We're no longer in an age where indifference is a privilege. We can't just say, well, someday in the future. We're there now. We are in that, as we could say, we're in that margin of error era. And yet now it helps, and I will be helping people at our church, Lord willing, this upcoming approaching Lord's Day by showing them, because a lot of them are startled now. Why is it? How is it? We woke up one day and we were just dealing with our own local political House Speaker being removed, and now we're seeing one of the most horrific things, and we're still reeling from the war against Ukraine and all the political landscape. And you see the geography changing. You see lines and borders being disputed. We've known that in the Middle East forever. So that's what I'm adding here, just because ironically I've had no time to prepare a lesson. That's why I went back to old work we've worked on, went back to this that we've spoken of previously, the dual causal reality. God is causal and he created man causal. And then this is the new feature, is to now notice that with the volume of knowledge changing, and now we have the ability to process it, computer capacity, I guess, whatever they call that, to process the data. We have networks that have become internetworks. They're now global, and the rate of speed and the rate of development, then imminence in one way is true, because all the things that a person says must take place first can now happen so quickly that a person who once said, no, all that doesn't have to happen, they can now stop and push pause for a moment and realize that by the time they finish next week, if we are all here next week, for example, in this same world together, and all of us who view this video, we might be in a world so different that it will be material for another video. So pay attention carefully to those who are teaching and pointing and showing, because one thing we all have in common when we get to this area here is that the kind of world it will be that warrants our removal, as pre-trib says, or our continuance until there's actual outbreak, as mid-trib says, or our condition that's so horrific we can't, most of us don't like to even think about going through it. So what kind of world will it be? Well, it can change quickly, and it's already done so, and now the mechanisms are in place. So with this, I'll get out of the way, and just the point is, if you're thinking eschatologically, begin to think in terms of exponential, because it's accelerating, just like the decay rate's accelerated 10 times. The dual causal relationship still in the midst of all this rapid decay. God steps in. Jesus said, I personally gave her time. He can afford a window there, a favor, a gracious, patient expression of his love and kindness and mercy, even for what we would call, characterologically speaking, a horrific person, Jezebel. And yet he did it, even knowing that he would do it for us. We know we're centered now on target with patterns that we don't even develop. We're just observing what people have studied and taught over the years. And now we notice we all are kind of here, because until I was taught meta in Matthew 24, meta in association with, I have never thought any kind of rapture that I was told would be anywhere. I never saw me being here even in 2023, speaking of the things that are being discussed today. So you have a blessed day. Enjoy this lesson.